So, in talking about green, the first thing that I want to encourage you to do is, if you have a Bible around, you may want to look at 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12. I'm going to talk about 2 Samuel 11 and 12 in just a little bit, but I think maybe that two-chapter segment in the Old Testament might be something worth reading alongside the green article. I think it speaks to this situation in a very real way that may help you in your practice area, help parents, others who are dealing with life-threatening situations, or a life that has terminated, right? So on page 734, when I look at green, there's this concept that she brings in talking about baby K. She talks about baby K's suffering, and it seems to me that that's a perspective kind of issue, because I don't know that baby K's mother thought the baby was suffering, but the nurses thought the baby was suffering. Now, this child had no upper brain matter, as I read it. Certainly not upper brain function, just some brain stem function that was controlling things that certainly a mother or a father would latch onto. The child sucks, the child has motion, but really the kind of things related to the seeds of cognition that we would maybe say defines life, they weren't there, right? The child could feel pain and would move away from pain, but they weren't going to inflict a lot of pain. So this issue of suffering, what defines suffering? And when Green talks about baby K's suffering, which is kind of the first case that she wants to delve into along this arc of talking about hope, and really stimulates one of the questions that I have in the thread of discussion as to whether hope is dangerous. That is a matter that I think we need to kind of resolve, and I'm not sure how easily it can be resolved. I may define suffering in one way, and you may define it in a different way. But whatever the case, it seems to me that suffering needs to be defined in a way that is helpful for us as practitioners, but also for the individuals that we're trying to help. So defining that is, as you read Green, as you reread Green perhaps, think about that question. If we're going to talk about hope, we have to really kind of nail what we think the definition of suffering is. Then on page 737, as she's getting into it, I had this kind of reaction. I'm really not sure I would define what she is looking at in telling the story of these nurses in Australia. I'm not sure I would define that as hope that these parents have, that there would be this kind of miracle, and I think as a Christian, and I pray for people, I pray for miracles. If someone in my congregation, if I was a pastor, which again I'm not at this point, but if someone in my congregation had a desperately ill child, and it didn't look like the child would make it, I would pray for that child to recover. That's a given. But where I would want to steer clear is kind of helping those parents to put their trust in a kind of false hope that God will do something or won't do something depending on how effectively I pray or how effectively I go through religious rituals. Which brings me then to another kind of reflection, again rooted on in the text on page 737. Is it possible that in the NICU, or maybe the ICU more generally or the emergency department, kind of contextualize that. Is it possible that in the NICU, like in the foxhole, there are no atheists? One of the things that Green notes several times is that these nurses were able to tell that this person or that person was extremely religious. And I'm like, you're seeing them at one very desperate point in their lives, and they're grasping at straws. That does not necessarily mean that they are indeed religious. Just like the soldier in the foxhole, the bullets are flying. Oh God, if you get me out of this, I'll serve you forever. Now, for 99% of the people, once the bullets stop flying, that promise, kind of goes by the wayside. But there will be that 1% where, and I'm making that statistic up, maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 12%, I don't know. But I do think it's a rather small percentage who will come back and say, well, God did get me out of that, ergo I must be a minister, I must be a missionary, I must be a nurse, I must be a doctor, I must be, a military chaplain, whatever it would be, right? Is it possible that when you see someone in a very desperate part of their lives, that it would be easy to extrapolate from that and say, well, if they're this way here and now, then certainly they are always religious. Well, they may have religious leanings, but that doesn't mean necessarily that throughout the rest of the course of their lives that that's who they are. They may just be desperate people. So I think the reason I bring that up is I think I want to make sure that enough walls are built or enough fences around the idea to say, maybe you just have people that are grasping at straws in the middle of this very trying circumstance. And if, depending on how you approach the religiosity of that parent in this case, how you think about that, it will probably alter, it will probably adjust how you deal with that parent or with that loved one when end-of-life issues need to be addressed. So I guess I would encourage some caution. I think this is, as I read Green's article, and I really do appreciate the focus on moral distress of the nurses, but as I read the article, I'm wanting to make sure that we define our terms and we don't over-define our terms, that we don't, or maybe I should put it this way, that we define our terms accurately, that we think about what these parents or these loved ones are thinking and feeling accurately. Just because somebody prays a prayer, and maybe this is my own experience for a lifetime of church service and work, just because someone prays a prayer in a very desperate point in their lives, that does not necessarily make them the kind of religious zealot that they may appear to be at that particular point of weakness in their life. So we'll come back and talk a little bit more about Green in the next segment.